Hey, welcome to episode 29 of the Ascendancy podcast. This is a show where we explore veganism, animal ethics, and activism to elevate humanity to a higher moral standard. My name is Austin.
And my name's Chris.
This is a part 2 of our vegan myth-busting series. Back in episode 4, we covered other myths, so be sure to check that one out as well. We appreciate it. And the first myth we're going to get right into is that veganism is extreme. Oftentimes, non-vegans describe vegans and veganism as extreme, and whether it's extreme as a restriction, a stance, or the rhetoric that we use, it's often referred to as this way. In reality, veganism is a moral baseline. It's simply not taking what isn't ours to begin with. Animals' lives and their bodies. So to prey on animals, to exploit them and dominate them, that's actually what's extreme. And it's an extreme injustice. So this rhetoric that, we're against animal exploitation may seem extreme, like some of the things, we say sound extreme, but they're only the result of the degree of injustice that we combat. And just for example, merely describing the actions that non-vegans inflict upon animals sounds extreme, such as enslavement, rape, slaughter, mutilation. Non-vegans do such atrocious things to animals that arguing against them in an honest way appears vulgar and extreme. And I think that if you actually see the footage of animal exploitation for yourself, you watch the films Earthling, Dominion, or you see any of the thousands of hours of undercover footage of the animal agriculture industry, you will see what extremism really is, and it's what humans do to their victims, to these beings. And we're not, extreme, we're just against injustice. So when you're doing such heinous things to animals, penetrating them sexually to make them reproduce, for you to eat their babies, throwing them into macerators, suffocating them to death, burning them alive, just all of the actual realities of exploiting them are so barbaric that we even just talk about them, that sounds extreme. Now, when it comes to veganism being like extreme as a restriction or a dietary preference or something like this is a result of people misunderstanding what veganism is. The actual act of abstaining from consuming animals, exploiting them, that's really just not violating someone. So to say that that's extreme, it kind of has parallels with saying that not murdering other humans is extreme, or not enslaving other humans is extreme. It has strong parallels with that because veganism is essentially a non-action, not taking what isn't ours to begin with. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well said, and it's important to start this episode with this myth because it's something we see so often. And like you said, Austin, it's just the moral baseline of not exploiting animals, not treating them like resources. If we were born in a fish's position or a pig's position or a monkey in a research lab, like it would just be obviously what we want, to be treated as a individual with our own consciousness, our own wills and desires to enjoy our lives, to be free from suffering. So just saying that we shouldn't exploit them, that's not extreme. That's just the basic moral baseline, like you said, of decency. And this really goes to show how brainwashed our society is, how it's become so normalized to prey on and exploit these animals because it's been done for so many hundreds of years, so many centuries, millennia even. And in reality, it's just returning to this basic foundation, this basic respect for animals that they deserve. It's not extreme, it's just the bare minimum. And it's just a deflection. People like to say we're extreme so they can not engage with our arguments when we're on the streets or we're online advocating for veganism. It's just the easy way to kind of paint this whole group as just being out there and crazy, so to not actually engage with the core, premise of our argumentation. What is it about animals that makes it acceptable to exploit them? This discrimination, this double standard. But people resort to just saying, oh, you're extreme, you guys are in the minority, you're like less than 1% of the population. you guys have to be wrong. It's like, obviously, no, those are all fallacies. And yeah, it's important to tackle this right away. There's nothing extreme about abstaining from preying on, violating, killing all these animals. It's just, like I said, it almost makes your brain melt. Like trying to like talk about this is like, I'm over here chilling, eating my beans, my rice. And you guys are over there like systematically slaughtering and exploiting billions of animals a year, treating them like nothing. Like that's pretty crazy. That's extreme. And when I'm doing my Cube of Truth demos on the streets with Anonymous for the Voiceless, like I see families come by our demonstration, we're showing footage of what happens to these animals, and the parents are like trying to get their kids not to look because it's obviously so gory and violent and scary. It's like, yeah, that seems a little more extreme to me than just living vegan, so yeah, it's good to start off there. Austin, you did well debunking that myth. So the next myth that's super common is that people think veganism is a diet. So it's easily the most common myth that we see. Veganism, it's a diet, something people go on to get healthy or lose weight. And they go off of that diet when they're traveling or celebrating, but in reality, it's not that. Veganism, it's an ethical principle. It's not a set of practices or behaviors. It's defined many decades ago as the idea that humans should live without exploiting animals. So it's from this principle that certain behaviors logically follow for vegans to live out, to act consistently with this principle. Avoiding using or buying animal flesh and secretions, animal skins, avoiding using animals for entertainment, buying products tested on animals, and any other sources of animal exploitation. So on one hand, I can see why this myth has become so prevalent, based on how vegans themselves advocate or speak about veganism. We often see phrases like vegan food or vegan diet, used by vegans and even by myself in the past, which obviously contributes to the proliferation of this myth. But I think plant-based diet is overall a better phrase to use in almost all circumstances instead of vegan diet. However, I don't have like the perfect alternative to propose to get around using the term vegan food, because I still think it's the best, most accurate descriptor for describing food that doesn't have animal flesh or secretions. And of course, animal flesh and secretions, it's not food. It's been normalized as food, but that's not food. What comes from the earth, what comes from the ground, that's real food. But my main point here is that it's not a diet, and veganism should be properly defined, as I did earlier, regularly by vegans when engaging with non-vegans and during outreach, so that more people truly understand what it is. You have anything to add, Austin?
Yeah, well said. And in my experience, that is most likely the most common counter argument of veganism that I receive. And it's this misconception that we're promoting a diet. Of course, a vegan-friendly diet, a vegan-compatible, animal exploitation-free diet is one of the many, many ramifications of the ethical principle of veganism. And that leaves us in this place where, okay, we're doing activism. How do we combat this false notion? And that's by defining veganism, explaining to people veganism isn't the diet. It's the ethical principle that humans must not exploit animals in all of its forms. And there are many, many forms that humans exploit animals, not, just the dietary exploitation of them. So firstly, we must define veganism in these arguments. And then we must really get people to acknowledge this before we move on to the practicality of it. Because when it comes to the pragmatics, there's many things that vegans don't do, and alternatives that we make throughout our lives in terms of many different things, when it comes to what we do for entertainment and where we go and the various products that we buy, and in every way that we interact with both the economy and with animals. So it's really important to frame it this way and to get people in a place where they must first acknowledge that animals aren't theirs to exploit. Once they understand that, once they acknowledge it, once they say, yes, I'm ready to be vegan. I get it. I want to be vegan from this day forward. Then we can talk about nutrition. We can talk about dietetics. We can help them with the how, but we shouldn't talk about the how until we get to the why, because it's, of course, only one aspect of veganism. And the next myth, and this is a very prevalent one as well that I receive pretty much daily at this point, and it's that veganism means causing zero harm. And there are so many straw man arguments that result from this misunderstanding. It's very common for non-vegans to use appeals to hypocrisy, the tu quoque fallacy against veganism, and this is whether it's saying something like crop deaths or electronics though, or how we harm animals by building houses. And I'll give you a specific example too. A non-vegan will say something like, oh, well, how can you say you're against animal exploitation when you use an iPhone or something like this? And mind you, the non-vegan is probably typing that on an iPhone themselves. And this is from this misunderstanding that veganism is either this utilitarian framework of reducing suffering, or, of course, that we cause zero harm to other beings, that our lives don't harm any humans or any animals. And this, of course, is an impossibility of existence when it comes to both humans and when it comes to animals. And veganism has strong parallels to foundational ethics on human rights. And in reality, every sentient being exists in some form of competition with others and causes some degree of harm to others, as we're in competition for land, resources, materials with every human and every animal. Veganism doesn't attempt to eliminate all harm or suffering, but it's to prevent beings with a high degree of moral agency and ability from dominating, from exploiting, and using the vulnerable. Like, veganism isn't some kind of shackles that you place on yourself and your life to mitigate all actions, all potential harm. Like, for example, when you drive, you can potentially hit an insect. You can potentially hit a person when you drive. When you interact with the economy and buy any consumer good, anything, animals can be harmed and people can and will be harmed as well. Like, for example, throughout the world, over 3 million people die within industry per year. This is more than all wars and all murders combined. People die producing goods, services, and making infrastructure. Does that mean it becomes morally acceptable to enslave, prey on, and consume humans? Absolutely not. And the same holds true with veganism, because we're not against all harm, causing zero suffering. That is an impossibility. I'm not saying that, to appeal to futility, but it's just not what veganism is. We acknowledge that we can't cause zero harm, but we have this baseline principle to not dominate, exploit, create a system of subjugation where we're just treating other beings as commodities and as objects.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. And I think you tackled everything pretty well with this myth. And to some extent, I think it's brought about by vegans, our own messaging. I see less today, but more so in the past, where vegans will say veganism's about reducing suffering, these utilitarian calculuses, and that inevitably leads to the furthest conclusion of that, which is, oh, veganism must be about reducing suffering to the zero and causing no harm, when really it's not that. And it's just this indefensible standard if we define veganism as that, because just looking at the world realistically, there always will be harm caused by our existence as individuals, as a species, but it just doesn't follow logically. Like, when you look at the human context, like you said, Austin, when it comes to, human rights as a foundational, principle, it doesn't follow from that we must never cause any harm, anytime, anywhere, to any humans. It's like just having society that will exist. So it just exists as this ethic that, humans have these rights that shall not be infringed, they shall not be reduced to property and exploited. It doesn't follow from that we have this utilitarian utopia end goal of like causing zero harm. So the same thing applies in animal ethics. Animals deserve these fundamental rights to not be exploited, to be reduced to property, to not be, just used by humans for our ends. And that just exists as a principle, and that's something that hopefully we can achieve. It doesn't follow from that we must cause zero harm forever to anyone and all animals. It's impossible, and it's not a standard that's defensible. So in the human context, we understand, harm happens to humans. It's unfortunate. That's part of the world. That same standard applies with animals. It's unfortunate it happens, but vegans are trying to obviously mitigate that. That necessarily follows from eliminating animal exploitation, a lot of the harm and the suffering. It's not the end in itself, but a lot of that will go away as humans, fix their relationship with animals. So yeah, I think that's a good point. So yeah, our next one here, our next myth is that some people will say vegans are overly sensitive or emotionally weak, for caring about animals and advocating for them. So implied in this statement is the idea that vegans should just accept the status quo, that animals will always be exploited and slaughtered for humans, and that it will never change. So vegans should just accept it and not be upset by it. We should just, tighten up and just get over it. Yeah, this is simply unacceptable. When there's any injustice in society, it is up to us to reject it and fight to achieve justice for the victims. And it's been this way throughout society, throughout all the injustices of the past that have been normalized, traditionalized. It's always been up to us to reject that and fight for them. And in this context, is to liberate animals from human oppression. Like it's glaringly unjust, and we have to see that and recognize that, and not just, turn a blind eye to it. To ignore or numb oneself to the suffering and exploitation of animals, it's not emotional strength or maturity. It's weakness, nihilism, and inhumanity masquerading as some kind of strength or stoicism. Like, you're not a tough guy, you're not this, big manly man for, not caring about animals being exploited and destroyed. Like, you're showing your weakness and your inhumanity, and, anyone saying this, like, we see right through it. You're not a big tough guy. Like, it's a strength to care for others, to have compassion, and to try to rise them out of their suffering. This is just complete myth. And another point is, when we were kids, we would scream and cry if an animal was abused, mistreated, exploited, and or killed in front of us in movies or TV shows. Where did things change? Where did things go wrong? Why have people become numb to or just unflinchingly accept the status quo of mass animal exploitation and slaughter? As activists, we see the answer very clearly, in our dealings with non-vegans and our activism. We see that there's cultural, scientific, moral propaganda that indoctrinates us from a young age to see some animals as property and to falsely believe we must farm, kill, and eat animals for our sustenance. But these are complete falsehoods, as we've discussed in prior episodes. So veganism, it's just about reconnecting to our correct, primal, and instinctual respect and concern for animals that we all had when we were kids, before we were indoctrinated by such propaganda. Having empathy for the suffering of others is not a weakness, but a strength, as it is this trait that powerfully motivates us to pursue justice for the victims and to make the world a better place. Someone being numbly nihilistic and uncaring for the suffering of animals is juxtaposedly a weakness, a glaring character flaw. So yeah, what do you think about this one, Austin?
Brilliantly well said, Chris. And I think a lot of this idea that caring about animal liberation is somehow emotionally weak or being overly sensitive comes from this stereotype, this idea that preying on animals is like manly or masculine or badass or something like this. And they couldn't be further from the truth. I read a study a while back, like a psychological study, where people, I should say men specifically, consumed meat more when they felt as though their masculinity was threatened. For example, in a setting where they felt they weren't competent enough, smart enough, brave enough, strong enough to be like quote unquote a real man, they turn to eating animals to fill that societal deficit. And in my case with vegan activism, I've seen this mirrored time and time again that, you know, men who are otherwise like inept cognitively, they sort of will say, oh, well, you're a beta male for being vegan, or you're sensitive, or you're weak, or something like that. And I think it's oftentimes like a form of projection. But then again, this idea that preying on the innocent, you know, is somehow strong or like the badass stance doesn't even have like parallels with how masculinity is traditionally viewed. Because what is a person, you know, who's genuinely stoic and strong? There's someone who's a protector, someone who's courageous, someone who will stand up and defend the innocent. And that's something that veganism shares a foundation with, and preying on the innocent doesn't. And in a world where 99% of people prey on animals, it takes more resolve, more emotional strength to stand against the grain, to stand on your own two legs against society, to defend yourself, and to defend the animals. So, what actually requires more strength? Going with the flow of your friends, of your family, of all of society, or willing to tell the 99%, no, actually, you're wrong about that. I would say that requires more resolve, more stoicism, and more emotional strength as well as intelligence. And when you look at, for example, criminality, there's a very strong correlation between criminal behavior and having a low IQ. So when people prey on animals, I highly suspect it's actually a result of having an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, especially when they try to tie that to being tough, to being strong. And on the next point, and this is quite a common one, I don't hear this maybe as much as the others, but still very common, is that vegans just want to feel superior. And as vegan activists, our primary aim or objective is to get humanity to stop exploiting animals. If our objective were to feel superior, why would we spend our time outreaching other people to be vegan? It doesn't make any sense. If we wanted to feel superior, we would gatekeep veganism. We would tell people that they shouldn't be vegan, that they're not good enough to be vegan. Oh, you're not able to understand veganism. You can't do it. But we don't do that. That's not, you know, how we're actually out there operating and interacting with people. Because we don't want to say, oh, you can't be vegan, you shouldn't be vegan. We want everyone to stop preying on animals. That's our objective. It doesn't make sense to allocate our time and our lives and our energy to getting people to stop doing this thing if we do it to feel superior. And in fact, I would even go as far as to say that many vegan activists feel defeated and depressed when they can't get people to understand veganism. That is extremely demoralizing to vegan activists to put so much time and effort out of their lives for this fight, for this cause of ending this animal exploitation and people not changing. That's actually something that's very depressing to vegans. So no, vegans aren't in it to feel superior. And just to add to that, it's quite baffling for non-vegans to make this claim while using human superiority as their excuse for preying on animals. So let's just think about this. Non-vegans say, oh, well, you know, you're just trying to feel superior to me because you're a vegan. Well, I'm really trying to get you to understand that it's wrong to prey on animals. Meanwhile, you're telling me, oh, well, it's actually okay for me to dominate animals because I'm a superior being. I'm the apex predator. I'm more intelligent. I'm stronger. Survival of the fittest. So it's like you're somehow against this notion of superiority when it comes to having moral superiority, yet you're also saying, oh, well, I'm superior to animals, so therefore I can exploit them. So No, we're not, you know, vegan because we want to feel superior. We're vegan because we acknowledge that it's extremely immoral to prey on animals, to exploit them, to use them as commodities, as objects. The reason why we outreach people and we share the reality of exploitation is so that you go vegan as well, not so that we can somehow be better than you. And believe me, we really don't want to think of ourselves as better than other people. We just simply want you to be vegan as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really hit it out of the park there, and I really like that point you made there toward the end. It's actually very common for people to use human supremacist arguments to justify their remaining non-vegan, and it's so ironic because on one hand they don't want to feel inferior to vegans, but then on the other hand they want to feel superior to animals so they can prey on and exploit them. It's just totally backwards. And I think on the whole, I would say well into the 90% plus, 95% plus, like most vegans genuinely want to make the world a better place. They want to get other people to go vegan. There's probably a very small fringe minority that may have like narcissistic traits, such that veganism is a way for them to differentiate themselves from the crowd, to say, I'm the 1%, you guys are all bad and wrong, look at me, I'm so much better than all of you. They're not doing effective activism, they're not using effective communication, they're not actually trying to get people to go vegan. It's kind of like a weapon they can use to make themselves feel better than others. But like I said, that's like 1% probably of like all the vegans. It does exist. There's a very small amount of vegans who just do it to feel better than everyone. They don't do effective activism, like I said, but on the whole, like, no, most vegans don't just do this to feel superior. It's absolutely a myth, and it comes from like non-vegans like feeling guilty, just feeling like rightfully so. You should feel guilty if you're knowingly exploiting and preying on animals for nothing more than your habit, your taste, your tradition, your culture. You should feel bad about that. These animals don't deserve to be your victims. And having that guilt shows that, there's still some, humanity within you. Like I said, when we were kids, we knew right from wrong when it comes to treatment of animals. So it's good that you feel guilty, and this myth kind of comes from that guilt. Like they just feel like, damn, these vegans, they just want to feel superior. I feel so bad now. They just laid into me for how my lifestyle is oppressive and destructive to the animals. They would just want to feel superior. I'm going to attack them instead of the message, attack the messenger instead of the message. Like, nah, we want you to become vegan. We want you to join the fight, become activists like us, and create a better world for animals. If we just wanted to feel superior all day, we wouldn't be doing this. We would be decreasing the number of people we could feel superior to by influencing people to change. So yeah, I think this is a good myth to cover. You did it well, Austin. So the next one here is people will say veganism is a cult, or vegans are part of a cult. And this is one I still see pretty regularly nowadays. It's not like a new myth. I've seen it in the past as well. So this is a claim I see, and while I can see how the behavior of vegans can make it appear to be the case that vegans are cult-like using strong moral language, sounding preachy, chastising ex-vegans, this is still a false claim. Pulling from the definition here on the internet, actual cults are defined as social groups which have unusual and often extreme religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. Extreme devotion to a particular person, object, or goal is another characteristic often ascribed to cults. So veganism does not involve devotion to particular persons or religious figures. It does not involve rituals. It does not isolate members from society. It's simply an ethical principle as previously defined. Now, some may say that vegans have extreme philosophical beliefs for believing animals deserve, their basic rights, deserving liberation from human domination, but that subjective claim can apply to any moral cause. That is, as it is purely subjective to say that someone's views are extreme. So that argument fails to describe veganism as a cult. And also, vegans are not the first group to be labeled as cultists or extreme. Many proponents of ethical movements in the past, like the civil rights movement, women's rights, and abolitionism, also dealt with the same charges from people in society. Would we hold today that people advancing such basic human liberties are extreme or cultists? If not, why do so for vegans who are fighting for animal liberation? The claim just doesn't hold any weight. And when we understand veganism as a very serious ethical stance, it brings context as to why vegans are incensed when certain boundaries are crossed regarding animal treatment, or how vegans are outraged at other vegans somehow reverting back to preying on animals and becoming ex-vegans. This is not about cultish obedience and remaining like part of the group in like a cult sense, but simply moral outrage, akin to the kind of moral outrage that most non-vegans display when dog or cat abuses are publicized in media. It's just that vegans are concerned about all animals instead of just dogs and cats. So we're outraged when someone who supposedly understands this ethic of respecting animals reverts back to their old ways and continues to exploit and prey on them. It's that same kind of moral outrage. So when you understand what veganism is, and I feel like a lot of people don't, when you understand what it is, it's easy to see like, oh, they're not part of a cult. They just have these strong ethical beliefs, and this describes their behavior. Like they're genuinely angry about this injustice, and they're incensed that someone would become an ex-vegan. When you understand it's not a diet, it's not like just something to lose weight with, then it makes sense as to why vegans behave this way. It's not cult-like. It's just we're really committed to our values, and we're angry when these boundaries are crossed. So, lastly here, if anything, I like to make the opposite case when someone calls veganism a cult, that the lifestyle of non-veganism, preying on and exploiting animals for food, clothing, testing, entertainment, any other reason, that's the actual cult here. There are several holidays each year revolving around animal sacrifice, and this applies globally, no matter what continent, part of the world you are. But just speaking from the U.S. perspective, specifically, we both live in the United States. You got Easter, 4th of July, Thanksgiving. These holidays revolve around exploiting and consuming animals. And if you think about it, most people would think it to be blasphemy or just outrageous to leave dead lambs, dead chickens, dead cows, dead pigs, and dead turkeys off the grill or off the dinner table for these holidays. People are pressured to constantly remain a consumer of animals through media and commercials. If you go vegan, you're often teased and made fun of for living out this ethic, and pressured to revert or cheat back to non-veganism. Vegans encounter social pressure to not contest or challenge animal use, and non-vegans often act very defensively and emotionally when faced with the vegan question, which seems like an effort to protect a part of their identity or their allegiance to custom, rather than doing what they should do, which is rationally and level-headedly considering an alternative viewpoint. So the way that preying on animals becomes so normalized, it makes it seem like the default, like this is like the normal thing. But when you look at it this way, it's easier to make the case that that's actually the cult here. It's like this system that's churning out propaganda, media, commercials, constantly trying to keep you in this system, in this lifestyle of exploiting and preying on animals. Vegans, we stepped out of the cult. We're out. We're trying to get y'all to stop being indoctrinated by this BS, telling you need milk for calcium, you need meat for protein, you need to do this and that to be a real man. It's all nonsense. Like we stepped out of the cult. If anything, it's the non-vegans that are still part of the cult. So, yeah, just kind of went into that. What do you think, Austin?
Very well said. You really covered all the bases. And when people say that veganism is a cult, I ask them, where's our temple? Between the church of not enslaving and the temple of not murdering? I mean, what are you talking about? And just to further emphasize that, in my own experience, veganism isn't a monolith. as vegans, we are all extremely different as individuals. We come together when it comes to this one thing, this one ethical principle. You know, we have different values outside of veganism, different thoughts on religion, on politics, on life, on philosophy, on so many different things other than this one thing. And I can say from my personal experience and myself that I'm not cool with most vegans. I'm not like, oh, these vegans are my people. I love all these people. We're like we're all tight. It's not like that. You know, I mean, like I respect other vegans. I appreciate them. I'm glad they're vegan too. But we don't have like some kind of groupthink. We're not, you know, all like on the same page on every issue, on everything. There's even a lot of like animosity between people who are, you know, vegan. We're still human after all. Like we don't share necessarily anything other than being against the exploitation and the domination of animals. And it's so ironic when people call veganism a cult. Like someone will tell me, oh, veganism is a cult. And then their argument, you know, against veganism is that their religion commands them to make blood sacrifice. And I've experienced that so many times where, and it's not one religion, it's multiple religions will tell me that, oh, my religion mandates that I make animals bleed out, or that I dominate them, or that they're here created for us by my God, by my religion. So like, you're saying that a supernatural entity is demanding you to make blood sacrifices to them, and I'm saying, no, you shouldn't do that, you know, devoid of any sort of supernatural reasoning. And my position is a cult. That's like nonsensical. And there's, you know, many Abrahamic religions, or all the Abrahamic religions have verses on that, and they have verses against it too. And people often cherry pick these religions to justify their behavior. Like when you go vegan, you're not demanded to leave your religion or leave your other values or completely change as a person or your identity or who you are. It's simply to stop taking what isn't yours to begin with, to stop preying on the innocent. You're not expected to join some group of vegans, you know, singing Kumbaya or something, you know. So I think it's just a complete falsehood. It's just a way to deflect. And I don't know, maybe people say that because it creates sort of an us versus them, you know, mentality. Oh, all of these vegans are in a group together coming after us. But it's really not the case. Like when you actually go vegan and you get it, you'll see, you know, vegans aren't a monolith. It's not a cult. You maintain your own identity, your values, yourself, your philosophy, anything about you that you already value outside of not, you know, preying on animals. But yeah, that's all we have in this episode. And if there's any other myths that you want us to cover, let us know in the comments. We're very happy to explore them in more depth and share our thoughts and our perspectives on them. So thank you for watching this episode. We do appreciate it. Feel free to connect with us in the comments on Instagram. Thank you. Peace.
Yep. Thanks for watching. Peace out.